Hello and greetings. Welcome to the Rooted Asian American Youth Ministry Roundtable podcast. Today, I am your host, Dorothy Lau, and I serve as the youth director at the Chinese Bible Church of Maryland in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan. Joining me today are two wonderful friends, colleagues, and pastors who support the work of the local church, as well as local churches supporting each other. Could you brothers please tell us a bit more about yourselves? And a little fun question is, are you the type who prefers to do solo projects or group projects? Let's start with you, Justin.
Hey everybody, Justin Wong. I am from Houston, Texas. Been working with students and families for a little over 2 decades. I do I like solo or group projects? That's a good one. I probably would like to do solo first and then bring into a group. But I would say 75% solo and then maybe 25% group.
Is that like how you were in high school or something, is what it is?
Oh no, it's flipped.
Oh, oh, you were one of those people. Did
Definitely.
you
Mm.
ride
Oh yeah.
okay, got it.
Unapologetically. I know where I am. I know my place. So
Self-awareness is important, yes. Okay.
absolutely.
All right, how about you, Terrence?
Hey everyone, I'm Terrence J. I'm the family pastor at First Chinese Baptist Church of Walnuts in the greater LA area. And in terms of collab or solo, I enjoy collaboration. I enjoy teamwork because I think we definitely could do more together. And I like when people, from different walks of life, gifts, personalities come together, for one greater purpose. But I do see how a lot of times there's need for there being a solo track first so that you're doing your part and then everyone brings what they have on the table together. So a little bit of both, but I mean, I think the nature of ministry, it calls for collaboration. So we have our own stuff to work on, but at the end of the day, I delight in having all that come together in the same direction.
Yeah, for sure. I think as I've gotten older, I actually appreciate group projects and the friendships that can also be built amidst them. Assuming that you like the people that you work with and become friends. Uh, but also knowing that it's so much more efficient to do things on our own. But I guess
Mm.
time and place for different reasons.
Yeah.
In high school, I was definitely more the solo person because I just could not deal with people who didn't do work. No hate, Justin.
Oh
Oh
no, it's okay.
man.
But
It's okay. Yeah.
anyways, I'm glad that we're able to talk about solo and group projects because today we will be talking about partnerships, more specifically collaborations within the Asian American Youth Ministry context. So overall this month we are talking about ministry partnerships, but how that might look for this week in a local setting versus in next podcast, we will talk about it from a missions perspective. So, today we explore what it's like for church youth ministries to collaborate for its gatherings, both in the regular school year and even for the annual retreat or special event. So, let's start off with a couple of questions here. Um, with it being, what is the concentration of Asian churches in your locality? So that's the first part. What's the concentration of Asian churches in your locality, or just considering that we all here are serving in the ethnic specific Chinese context? What is it like in Houston? What is it like in LA? But
Mhm.
also, in what way does that concentration make it more or less possible to link up with another church youth ministry for a given youth night? So maybe let's start with you, Terrence.
I mean, where my church is located, there's just a large proportion and percentage of Asians. So whether
Yes.
it's just East Asians, Southeast Asians, we're surrounded and we're right in the middle of it. So there's
Mm.
definitely a lot of churches that are available, and it's not just Chinese heritage churches. It's also Korean heritage churches, Asian American churches, and even I would say your typical majority culture churches. There's tons of Asian presence in them.
Mm.
And so the possibility of being able to collaborate together with other churches, if they're wanting to go in the same direction as it relates to students, as it relates to schools, as it relates to certain causes or charity or volunteering opportunities, it's very high to be able to do that here, which then I think makes it then more of a reveal of how much we want to work with others than
Mm.
it is that do we have the possibility of working with others.
Yeah.
I think where I was serving at, it was pretty central in the city. There's about, I would say, in terms of the Chinese churches, there's about five, six really more prominent ones. So I think if you were just to Google Chinese churches, you would probably hit maybe 5 to 7. There's a couple of really big Korean churches, and then a couple of big Vietnamese churches. And so
Hmm.
I think as you look at how Houston developed, right, and how the suburbs kind of pushed the city out further and further. I mean, Houston, everything's about anywhere from 30 to 45 minutes at average
Hmm.
distance wise. And so, yeah, I mean, I think like Terrence, we have a good distribution. It's pretty scattered in terms of locale.
Hmm.
You can probably hit a decent Asian church within 15 20 minutes.
Hmm.
But it really depends on, did your family grow up there? What's your profession? And then I think when you hit the 2010s, I think the game has changed. And then after COVID,
Hmm.
it changed again. So
Mm,
um, there's a lot of different layers and elements. We could probably get into that later.
Sure,
mm,
sure. So it sounds like there's just a lot of sprawl or spread where churches are, and no matter what, traffic is always going to be an issue, of course.
yeah.
Even speaking for myself, having grown up in the Chicago suburbs, it was you knew someone loved you if they were willing to either drive out of the city or drive into the city, no matter what,
Yeah.
just to spend time with you, even um, to worship with your community, even if it was not local, right? So even the concentration of churches around Chicagoland was very high, but the spread, because Illinois is a large state, not as
Mhm.
large as the great nation of Texas or California, but even here on the East Coast where I serve and have been serving for the past 7 years, it's like there's like 20 Chinese churches within a 50-mile radius,
Oh.
and I think I've only ever met other youth ministry colleagues, between like three or four of them at best.
Mhm.
So, yeah, Terrence, I definitely echo and agree with what you said that it's possible, but how desirous or how manageable is it for us to actually do something together? It takes a little bit more thought other than just intention, right?
Yeah.
So, considering where you are, and I know that, for a number of our listeners, they are scattered across not just the US, but maybe even across the world, and
Mhm.
whether they are in Asian churches of high concentration in their region, or they're the only Asian church within a large area, um, what would it look like to partner with another ministry for you specifically, right? So, what would it look like, or maybe you have an anecdote from the past? What would it look like, or what has it looked like to partner, whether for a youth night, for a retreat, for a special event? Let's go back to you, Justin. What does that look like?
Ugh, that's a good question. I think early on, if I got dropped into a city, brand new, and I did this one stint in Atlanta, so I was there for like 9 months, a year,
Mm.
and then when I came back to Houston, I kind of did the same thing. But it was just who. Let's make a circle around our church, what 5-10 mile radius, and just see what the churches are. I think
Mhm.
that was kind of the initial, platform that we try to use, and then um, what kind of partnership are we trying to foster?
Mm.
Depending on the scope and the missional, you know, criteria, then that was like, okay, like let's figure out, are we doing worship night together? Are we doing camps? Are we doing community service? Because where are we theologically, philosophically? And
Mm.
so I knew that the closer we got to kind of our church philosophy, theology, missions, it would be a little bit easier in terms of partnership. But we also knew that it was important to just meet up with churches kind of in the neighborhood. Now, I think that's a whole, I mean, we could probably sidebar that conversation of, alignment and partnerships on that. But to me, that was just what I did. I just try to draw a circle and just go, hey, who's in my neighborhood? And then
Mm.
later on, I asked my kids, like my students in the youth group, where do the other Asians go? And then try to utilize that question to see where the other churches are drawn from.
Where do the Asians go? They go to get boba. So
Mhm.
Yeah,
gotta have
That's right.
church. Go get boba.
yeah.
Nah.
But our church was a little bit different. I mean, we were the oldest Chinese church here in Houston,
Oh.
and so people were driving from practically all over the city.
Hmm.
And so, it was a little bit more difficult because, just the distance made it
Mhm.
hard.
This is a curiosity question, but to your knowledge, like how far in terms of distance, or maybe even time as well, how far or how long are people willing to commute just to
Yeah.
go to church?
Yeah. I would say if you're listening to this podcast, this would be a very practical thing to do is just to get the statistics and the data.
Mm,
We tracked ours. It was about 16.8 miles per family
mm,
that was
Wow.
driving. So in Houston, again, this determines how frequent you do your programming, but then also just when do you do your programming.
mhm,
Hmm.
Um, our people are driving on average maybe 20 minutes. Some of the furthest people were an hour and a half. And so
Wow.
that was like a 3 hour round trip.
that's commitment.
And which was like, hey, if our program is only 45 minutes an hour and we're asking them to drive 3 hours, like, is it worth it? Um, so I would say you would want to see where your students are coming from, your families are coming from,
Hmm.
and then just track the data. It
Yeah.
it does speak to planning and everything.
Yeah. So considerations for distance, for time, for the worthwhileness. Like you don't want to have a last minute put together night when there are families who are making that commitment and that drive
Yeah,
to
for sure,
Hmm.
participate. Yeah.
for sure.
Okay.
I think to add to what Justin said, what we are trying to be intentional about when we think about partnerships is where are our students? So what I don't mean that just like geographically or like physically, but where are they putting in their time? So more recently, just as an example, the last couple of years, we've been more invested in the Christian club of a particular high school
Mm.
Mm.
because we've been encouraging our students to be disciple makers locally and globally to share Christ where they're at, and they've started clumping up in one particular Christian club and taking positions of leadership. So we're like, you know what? That's God's opening that door. So let's see what we can do to sponsor that, to support that, to be present in there. And so our youth pastor, he's now, just an active part of that particular Christian club on a weekly basis. So this is obviously not something you could do with every single school that you happen to have students attending, but it's where, if God is moving in a certain direction with this particular group of people, then we're able to see the continuity and the possibility of partnership because it's not making people choose. It's
Mm.
actually just supporting them and bolstering, the journey that they're on. And so that would be like a practical example. But even then, as we're continuing to encourage and build up our students, we want them to consider similar ways of being involved. And I think that'll help us to decide how can we be involved.
Yeah,
Yeah, for
good.
sure. I'm so glad that you brought that up because I'm too reminded of how, even in my locality, there are several high schools who have Fellowship of Christian Athletes or
Mhm.
other Bible studies that could be church-based or just student-based entirely because they had a vision or a desire and they wanted to get people together. But I do recognize that even as my students go to school with other students from different churches, I don't know about you, but like, how likely do you see your students interact with Christians from other schools or even within their own schools?
Yeah.
Because in my context, I think uh, there's not like blatant exclusivity of friend groups, but I wouldn't say it's
Mhm.
the most inclusive either. So even if it's like, oh, we're all Christian, it's like, yeah, but you don't go to my church. So there's kind of that territorialism that could occur. Not that, again, students wouldn't want to collaborate, but I think if they're not used to that, then perhaps they are much more reluctant to step into those environments as well.
Well, I mean, I think it's a familiarity thing too, right?
Okay.
So
Mhm.
if you're going to school and so, the Chinese kids coming from our church, they see other Asians, they'll probably gravitate towards them first in
This is
terms of
true.
partnership, right? Even within a Christian organization versus another one, just because maybe they're familiar, maybe they've done camp or some other citywide event, because
Mhm.
the possibility of that happening is more likely than partnering with another non ethnic specific church. Now, I
Mm.
think that's on the shoulders of the youth minister
Mhm.
to diversify some of the, the the events that the student ministry is doing.
Mhm.
Because if it's only just Asian Americans, then that's then you're sending also a message for partnership and these type of things as well. So
Do you know where you're called? Shortly after his conversion, Adoniram Judson discerned his call to international missions alongside several of his classmates at seminary. At Judson College, we want you too to discern your calling and prepare for a lifetime of disciple making in a vibrant Christian community. At Judson College, it is our mission to equip students to give their lives for the cause of Christ in the church, among the nations, and in every aspect of society. Through the courses, relationships, and culture you experience here at Judson, you will be well equipped to serve Jesus wherever he calls you, in whatever context or career. To learn more about our variety of degrees, world-class faculty, and enduring mission to equip students as ambassadors for Christ, visit judsoncollege.edu.
Yeah, I don't mean to date myself here, but just kind of throwing it back a little bit, and maybe Justin relates to this. If you remember, when I was growing up and even going into college, something that happened in the pre-internet era is that students got together all the time for like these praise nights. They would get together, they would plan all out for like months, and then you would just all meet in this room and just like sing, and there's some kind of preaching and then all the kind of stuff. And that would happen, I felt like at least 2 or 3 times a year, like where I was growing up. And that was just normal.
Multi churches.
Yeah, multi churches. And people were so excited to be able to meet. But then now I feel like part of the cultural change is people are able to connect with people on their phones, or so they think. And so they don't meet, they're not motivated to get out of their comfort zones to make that effort to plan and to meet with other people in this kind of setting. So I don't know about you guys, but I feel like our kids today, they're missing out on just that organic just interaction that happens as Christians are hungry, and they're like, wait, this can't be all there is, me stuck in my own church or me stuck at my school, and they want to meet other people. It was just such a vibe back then. I loved those gatherings. It was a wonderful way to meet people, and I have friends even now, whether we've served together or we were just people that met at that time during those kind of gatherings, that we are still in touch with each other because what united us was not just something superficial, but it was we were seeking God together.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's my sidebar too. I feel like our students kind of are in a culture where that's just not as normal or as natural as it should be.
Yeah. And if I can give a word of advice to the youth ministers and the leaders out there who are planning calendar-wise your year, I mean, we kind of lead out in how to disciple and train our people, and so if we're not intentionally setting our students up to see this modeled out with us first leading the way, like it's going to be very difficult for them. And so if all of our programming is all internal, then obviously it makes it more difficult. But then also, I think now the trend is what Terrence says, you make relationships digitally, if at all, right? I mean, because there's just this gravitation towards doing self-fulfilling pleasure or whatever else, right? It's just all me on my own. And so I think as youth ministers, I think you have to almost disciple your students to go out there, but then also give them opportunities to experience it as well. And so you have to do the hard work of showing them again how does partnership work, because if they see you do it, then they're like, okay, I may be able to do it too. So
yeah, for sure you guys do well to speak into the nature of modeling and even just like sharing of that nostalgia. Terrence, when you're talking about the praise nights, actually my church just had a praise night this past Saturday.
Awesome.
It was planned.
All throwback.
Yeah.
It was planned by one of our college students, actually one of my former summer youth interns as well, and another sister. And we had that with the intention for it to be mostly for our English congregation. Not that it was an insular invitation, but it's like we want this to be an intergenerational event and something that can help revitalize and restore, I guess, a desire to worship, even just through music and also through prayer. We had some college students from local universities come. We had maybe 1 or 2 people from other churches come, but for the most part, I think you're right. It was a way to not just have the congregation connect, but having other local believers to connect with each other. And it's such a precious thing to have brothers and sisters in the faith meet each other, even if they are not in the same social circles, but because our greatest commonality is the gospel and believe in Christ. And that's something that I do want to impart to my students, especially is when we're thinking about partnering with another ministry, it's not for vanity's sake, but it's like, hey, your pastors are friends, and we want, you as students to meet each other too, because you can have more in common than you would think. It's just you have to kind of find those overlaps.
But what you said, I think that's really hard. I think it's easier nowadays, but I think when we first started, it was really difficult.
Oh, for sure. For
And
sure.
I think part of it was the turnover rates with student ministers who were only there for a couple of years. And so there was no like longevity of relationships.
Yeah.
But then also just going like, man, meeting on top of doing youth ministry and calendaring and all the stuff that you're supposed to do internally to then go out and kind of put more effort and energy to building relationships, working with different and maybe difficult people. That took a lot of work. And so, and if you're young in this youth ministry world, I'm like, it's hard, but the fruit comes after 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years, right? And you don't see it early on, but when your students know that, hey, what you said, your pastors are all friends and they're not competing. And if anything, you see them collaborating even more. There's a lot of protection in the city, but then also there's a lot of fruit that could come out of it too.
Yeah. How would you, this is kind of off the cuff of a question, but how would you guys respond to a youth pastor who may feel disenchanted that they've been attempting to partner with other ministries, but they haven't really been able to, be as connected with another local ministry, or there just isn't one nearby. They're looking for help or wanting to provide resources for their students, but kind of met with deaf ears. How would you respond to that, youth pastor? Maybe Terrence, you can start us off.
Well, it's all about relationships. And this is not at any point critical of this youth pastor. I feel like what you're describing definitely can be typical for some. So I would try to see if I could dive into some pastoral friend groups just in the area, or just even through the students that are in their church and the people that he's working with. Maybe there's opportunities to make connections. It might mean that that person would have to take a little bit more initiative to build some of those relationships, to initiate some of those conversations, to be able to possibly form ministry partnerships. But yeah, I hear you. It just, the opportunities to build relationships is actually probably where that can grow.
Yeah. I recently was catching up with a colleague here around Rockville, Maryland, and we've been partnering together for our ministries for the last maybe 3 or 4 years. Right after COVID, we ended up having like an on-site, quote unquote, summer camp where basically it was prepared curriculum, and then we just had our kids come together in the same building, which is my church as the host church. And ever since then, we had a summer camp for 3 summers right after that. It was just for a weekend. And for sure, in the beginning, our kids just did not really know how to interact with each other. Because again, coming out of COVID, like, what teenager really has the social skills and developmental prowess to actually know how to talk to another human being other than through texting and Zoom? But aside from that, within now, just this last summer, which was our final summer camp year, only within 3 years, right? We said that this is the last one because there have been some conflicts with mission trips, but secondly, because we did see that it was of more value to pour into our students on a deeper level, like in smaller group level, rather than just having them show up for a weekend out of the year and then never really come back to the Christian community again. And so that's something that we just saw is really important in how we are trying to create more overlap between our ministries, not to create territorialism or isolationism either way. But we've just been able to grow as friends and colleagues, and even more than now, our students who do go to school with each other between our 2 churches, they feel more compelled to actually be in Bible study together or in Christian fellowship together in their schools, and even spending time outside of school. So I think, like, I just praise God because there is the fruit that can come from creating those points. But kind of as we move into the last part of talking about collaborations and partnerships between local ministries, maybe humor me a little bit. What are, the very practical benefits of collaborating? But on the flip side, what are some complex areas that, can make it difficult to also partner and collaborate? So let's go back to you, Justin. What are some benefits and complexities of collaborating together between church youth ministries?
So I think we talked about this before. Just having the students see the pastors, the student pastors, work together. I mean, what we've tried to do early on when we first started was we just called around, or just like, hey, let's meet up once a month.
Mhm.
just to catch up.
Mm.
What are you guys going through? What's on the calendar? What are y'all struggling with? And so it was just it became, the Houston Youth Pastors Network, and we've been doing it for about 20 years. You
Yeah,
know,
you guys are strong, man.
yeah. I mean, and that's a lifeline for us, honestly. Like there's no way I could have made it through, ministry without having that core, and people have come in and out, but having that monthly was huge. But what came out of that was, hey, how do we do stuff together? So, there's a large Chinese church here in Houston that they kind of do summer camps on their own just because of the size and the scale. But the rest of us, we kind of do a summer camp for the middle schoolers and then the high schoolers together.
Mm.
And then we have a event, a couple weeks afterwards as a kind of a post camp. And so everyone comes together. But the strategy behind that was most of our kids are probably going to end up graduating and going to the same colleges together. So
Mm.
they'll come back in the college fellowships on the college campuses. And so we want to give them a running head start to not only build the relationships in high school, but to have almost a similar theology and philosophy of ministry, so that as they jump into college, they're already prepped and equipped by year one, And so that was the plus. I'll wait on the difficulties after I hear from Terrence.
Sure. Go for it, Terrence.
I totally agree with you on the college aspect of it. I really think that, we have to see the win in youth ministry, not just the success of our programs or our attendance or anything like, or even maybe how hip or how known we are in the community as a youth ministry church. But it's that we want to see the students own their faith and continue to follow Jesus into college and beyond. So we are a launch pad for them for the rest of their lives of obedience to Christ. And so when they grow up out of our church, they need other people. It comes down to, something that simple, is that they need Christian friendships. They need Christian encouragement. They need Christian accountability. They need to go to church. They need to be active. And it helps when they are able to be connected to people in their youth days so that, as the Lord brings together various paths in life and journeys, that many of those things would just naturally or supernaturally intersect. And I've heard that happen over and over and over again, of people attending a retreat, people showing up at a particular seminar, people attending a youth fellowship either once or many times where they met. Then when they get to college and beyond, there's a lot more that God does through that. So I totally agree with Justin on that. I would say another thing, and coming from my church, I would say that we probably can be one of those churches that can operate in a self-sufficient manner. Kind of like, if we just run our stuff, there'll be plenty of things for our students and parents to do. Like, we don't need to add more things, but that also means that we sometimes just, become very inward and very tribal in how we see all other Christians and all other churches. And so if anything, I think it broadens our hearts when we work with people with the right motivations, to come alongside, to serve together, because it reminds us again that it's not just about our church. Like, what we're doing is a greater thing that Christ has commanded all his disciples to do, to make disciples. And so it's not just our way, and that unity needs to be found in greater ways. And so our students learn a lot from that. They're able to see that it's greater and more than just what they experience on a weekly level, and that's good for them.
We are thrilled to announce Rooted's new book with New Growth Press, The Jesus I Wish I Knew in High School, Asian American Edition. Being a teenager is itself an overwhelming experience, but the struggles unique to Asian American teenagers can often lead them to wonder if anyone truly knows what they're going through. In this book, 12 authors come alongside Asian American students to share their own high school experiences, helping students to see how Jesus makes a difference in our unique struggles. Jesus sees them and knows them fully. These testimonies of growing up Asian American include struggles with belonging, performance pressure, fear of failure, living in an honor-shame culture, eating disorders, sexual assault, and adoption. The writers now walk faithfully with Jesus in their ethnic and cultural distinctions. These stories lift up the Asian American experience with dignity, offering representation and belonging. We hope you'll read this book and share it with the Asian American teenagers in your home or church.
And can I add on another advantage is when we do kind of cross church ministry, not only do students get to minister to other students, right? I mean, because it's the same thing. Like they want to know, hey, Jesus and the gospel doesn't just make sense at our church, but it makes
Mhm.
sense at other churches. And like you said, there's a family of faith that's beyond kind of the local aspect. But then even for us as ministers, we get to have a hand in, supplementing the other ministers in shepherding their people too. And
Mhm.
so how many times have we done, like counseling and, and reinforcing the same message that their church is doing. And I think that's, they're getting discipleship from multiple sources, which is a benefit, right?
Mhm.
And then also like if they're in a season of it's difficult where they're at, they have the ability to go ask for help at other places too. So
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I think that probably just one of the greatest benefits is for our students themselves. They can receive care, they can be exposed to wider reaches of ministry, of church culture, or just being able to grow in different spaces and not feel like they're confined to just one.
Mhm.
But on the other hand, right, maybe some of the hardships that can come with ministries coming together is like different levels of trust. Right? Obviously, you want to trust your pastor more than another. Or I think in my adolescence, I was like, why are they doing it that way? Like, just have
Yeah.
a sense of, I guess, for lack of a better word, it was ignorance and arrogance in a woven braid. As like, as if my church was the only way that you could really do
Mhm.
things well. And I can see that that's just at a student level, but again, it's giving them a greater insights as to how ministry can happen, and it's not just one church way. Any other last thoughts about like hardships or the um, blessings that can come from collaborations between youth ministries?
We we felt the difficulties of not partnership per se, but owning this philosophy. Like if we believe that this is good and right, which I do, um, when it comes down to students moving to different parts of the city, or we're just like, hey, logistically, it actually makes sense for you to go to this church.
Mhm.
And also to say, hey, our church and our youth ministry, we can't provide everything that everyone needs. And so we're very specific sometimes.
Mhm.
And so this youth ministry, however, is able to meet you where you're at, and to be able to trust that youth program to go, hey, I think that might fit at this moment.
Mhm.
That's very difficult. I got in trouble, especially with kind of the other congregations when we had to come out and say, you know, we think this student or this family might grow deeper at this other church and this other youth program versus ours.
Mm.
And our heart was, hey, we just want them to grow no matter where it is. But when people play a numbers game or even a territorial understanding, then it gets very, very difficult. And so sometimes the difficulty is not with you and the student, maybe sometimes it's with your leadership, which is something that
Yeah.
I would highly encourage you guys to talk with your leadership now so that you don't run into a difference of philosophy later on that causes more internal conflict. And so that's a lesson I had to learn my first 5-7 years.
Yeah, I'll jump on that real quick. And maybe this is by extension some pastoral wisdom too, is at the end of the day, if let's say your role is youth pastor, youth director, next gen, pastor director, whatever it is that they might call you, student pastor, your church has hired you to first serve the students and the families of that church. And so while we're talking about ministry partnerships and all of its benefits and all of its, kind of boundary passing ways of really growing our students for their good, we are still primarily anchored to our local church. And so I think before we start planning outward to where sometimes we might end up being like, an inch thin, but like a mile wide in all of our endeavors, that we got to make sure that we, to the best of our ability, have clarity and competence in what we're doing in our home church. Then that's what we bring to the table to work with others. And that's actually how people get blessed too. It's not that we have it all together, like for everybody, but that we have our stuff together so that we can contribute to a unifying vision and pursuit with others. So that's important, because a lot of times I feel like, what your senior leaders sometimes are saying to you, if they don't like you being outreaching or whatever, is that indirectly you're saying, wait, but what about this stuff you're supposed to do here? Mm-hmm. Like, why are you thinking outward when you're not taking care of business at home? Mm-hmm. And so that's just a good way to maybe filter through your interests as it relates to ministry partnerships, just wanting to make sure that everything is, kind of tied down at home. And then what you can handle going out, would be something you'll receive support for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cohesive vision is definitely an important facet, not just in collaboration, but for the fact that if our own church ministries or if things going on within our own churches is not settled, then we can't be as eager to just jump to the next opportunity. And I think having peace at home is very important, Terrence. So thank you for that pastoral word.
That's good.
As we kind of near the end of our time now, just want to give room for final thoughts or other exhortations and encouragements that you would give to the struggling or aspiring youth pastor who is looking to branch out beyond just their ministry. As you're kind of thinking about that, I can also share that if you're wondering, youth pastor, whether or not it's worth it, it is. It is also hard, as Justin has said, whether it's logistically or in communication or just trying to figure out which space in the church can we use that isn't already occupied that can still house as many of our students. It's definitely worth it, because I think about how crucial it is for our students to be in company with other fellow believers, and it shows them that relationships are more than just being in the same school, being in the same ministry, doing the same sport, but it's learning to love one another and seeing each other as like fellow souls, because beyond youth group, beyond youth ministry, there may be overlap in your lives, and might as well, learn how to establish those relationships in the gospel now, and then you can see those relationships flourish. And I myself have been a beneficiary of that, and being able to see how powerful it is to fellowship and go to camp with persons all around the Midwest for a week-long summer camp. And even to this day, I'm still friends with like a good 45 to 50 of those people, just because we went through really transformative weeks to get together in our teenage years. And although we don't talk all the time, it's that space was created for us and really helped us to understand and know Jesus together. And that's a really wonderful thing that we can create for our students, where, right now we could be consumed about the numbers, but more importantly, how much qualitative relationships can we help to build, not just to keep track of the quantitative ones. So, Justin, any last thoughts? And then to Terrence.
I think when we talk about partnerships, as you pray through these concepts, I think it's also asking the Lord to give you a heart for your city, right? Partnering with other local churches in the area, it is a prayer for your city, to ask the Lord to do something amongst the people you live around, right? I mean, that's the whole point of partnering locally, not seeing them as competitors but collaborators. But then also just, I think, to pray big prayers of asking the Lord, hey, what can you do through us in our city together? But then also just how do we be faithful as our own little, local church too?
Yeah.
And then, because I think sometimes we don't think the Lord can do it sometimes. And so I wonder how it would change ministry if we saw the city as it's put on our shoulders, our collective, and how can we see the gospel go throughout the city to move from darkness to light? So I think that's a prayer I would challenge you listeners.
For sure. Terrence?
I just want to invite you all to our monthly Zoom call. Third Thursday of every month, Asian American youth workers, 9 a.m. Pacific, because we like waking up early. No, we don't. And 12 Eastern. Come join us. That could be a first step for you to be able to make some connections outside of your local church if you're open.
Yeah. Need a retreat speaker? You'll find one there.
Oh, for sure. We'll put those things in the show notes, right?
Oh, yeah.
More work for Danny. Yeah, more work for Danny.
Yeah. Thanks, Danny.
Okay. Well, with that, fellas, thank you so much for your input Also, listeners, thank you for joining us in today's Rooted Asian American Youth Ministry Roundtable podcast. We are so glad that you could join us, and we look forward to the next time that we get to chat. Until then, may the Lord bless and keep you as we trust in the death and the resurrection of Christ to transform our homes, our cities, and our churches. Follow this podcast on Apple Podcast or Spotify, and you can also find us on Instagram at The Rooted Ministry. We will talk with you soon. Until next time, peace and grace. Bye-bye.